It was his first big political speech of the year, rebooting the NHS.
Okay.
But even as the Prime Minister was on his way to the hospital venue, Elon Musk was busy with his online personal attacks. Tweeting, Starmer is complicit in the child sex gang crimes, and prison for Starmer.
Happy New Year.
The Prime Minister decided he had to return fire.
Those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. These are people who are trying to get some kind of vicarious thrill from street violence that people like Tommy Robinson promote.
Come here. Take over, Eli, just take over.
Keir Starmer had been expected to duck a direct confrontation with the billionaire, for now at least, a fixture at the side of President-elect Trump. What may have goaded him was Elon Musk's abuse of Labour MP Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding. In recent days, Elon Musk tweeted, Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist. What a wicked witch she is. Prison for Phillips now.
When the poison of the far right leads to serious threats to Jess Phillips and others, then in my book, a line has been crossed.
The Prime Minister attacked the Tories for their reaction to Elon Musk's attacks on Jess Phillips.
If you're not prepared to stand up as a Tory MP and denounce what's been said about Jess Phillips, who's now had threats made to her, then you need to seriously consider why you're in politics in the first place, in my view.
I absolutely oppose the intimidation of any member of Parliament. I said that yesterday, I'll say it again today. But let's keep in mind that what we're here to do is stand up for these vulnerable young girls who are systematically raped and abused.
But Keir Starmer had the Tory leader in his sights, condemning her weekend article on grooming gangs, which won her an approving good for Kemi Badenoch tweet from Elon Musk.
What I won't tolerate is politicians jumping on the bandwagon, now so desperate for attention that they're amplifying what the far right is saying.
It is not far right to stand up for victims of mass rape. And smearing people who raise those issues is exactly how this ended up getting covered up in the first place.
Keir Starmer said we didn't need more inquiries. Alexis Jay's report looked at how institutions failed to protect children. Male gangs in specific towns was one part of the broader remit for the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. It called for more data, which last year's Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force report tried to address. But it said only 1/3 of suspects had ethnicity recorded. It followed other investigations into gangs operating in Oxfordshire, Telford, Rochdale, Greater Manchester, and 2 investigations into Rotherham, the second of which, led by Louise Casey, said fear of being labelled racist had contributed to covering up crimes.
Looking at all these different reports, and I have done, they're just skimming over.
Marlon West's daughter was abused by grooming gangs. He wants a national inquiry into those gangs' operations.
I'm very cautious because there's a fear of being stereotyped, of being, extreme right wing or racist. And I do believe that is one of the major problems with the police forces, local authorities and the government, is they do not want to challenge this. They see it as a poison chalice.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Keir Starmer said the answer was to implement report recommendations already made. The sleepless American tycoon pinged out his verdict on the New Year political launch. Keir Starmer, he tweeted, was deeply complicit in the mass rapes in exchange for votes. Starmer, he wrote, is utterly despicable.
So how do child abuse victims feel about the row that has blown up? Well, joining me now is Lucy Duckworth from the Survivors Trust, who is herself a survivor of child abuse. Lucy, when you hear what Elon Musk has said about Keir Starmer, about Jess Phillips and so on, does that help survivors of abuse or not?
I don't think this conversation is helped by picking out any individuals and making any criticism of them, especially when we're using hateful language in the same way as perpetrators do towards their victims.
You see it as hate speech, do you?
I think that if anybody is calling for somebody to suffer and experience a crime, which is what Elon Musk has done, then you know, I've heard MPs today as well refer to that as hate speech. Child sexual abuse and the problem that we are encountering in the UK is really complex. That's why we are in the situation we are in. And we need to make sure that those making comments on it and who are receiving publicity for that are really fully understand the complexities of it and what needs to be done to finish it.
So it shouldn't be reduced to, you know, tweets here and there and you know, apparently politicians jumping on bandwagons, as Keir Starmer says.
Exactly that. I mean, this subject affects people for their entire life. There's over 13 million adult survivors in the UK today. They will experience adverse health conditions, lower rates of employment. They're even more likely to die earlier than their non-abused peers. These are the issues which are much more important than what we see on Twitter.
Nevertheless, because this row has blown up, the Home Secretary, you know, we assume she's responded to that, has now said that if anyone works with children and fails to report child sexual abuse, they'll face prosecution. You've been calling for that for a while, haven't you? We have. We've been calling for that since before the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse even began. It's great to hear. We know that mandatory reporting is something that in the UK we're very behind on. The fact that a child can be abused, another professional can know about it and not take action should be something that the public are outraged about. It's great to hear that's going to happen. It must be done correctly and it must incorporate all institutions. Right. I'll come back to that in a minute. But, you know, do the Conservatives have a point that the Alexis J child sexual abuse inquiry didn't devote sufficient attention to the grooming gangs, and therefore there could be a need for a new inquiry into that issue specifically?
Professor J was really clear in her report that she wasn't going to look at areas that had already been looked at. It did have a report on organised networks. Now, what do we mean by organised networks? All child abuse, when it is perpetrated by groups of men, is an organised network. We're seeing this online. We're seeing this through forums where men are sharing the abuse of children. We're seeing this in the Church of England by priests who are organising themselves and are abusing children. This is everywhere. This is so much bigger than one particular area. Now, I know the pain and the frustration that the survivors have experienced. That's why they're calling for another inquiry. They want action, they want accountability.
So would another inquiry help?
Well, it's 2 years later and we haven't even acted on the report from the first inquiry.
Do that first.
We cannot afford any more delays. We've got 20 clear recommendations that will provide a roadmap to beginning to end this pandemic in child sexual abuse, and we need to act on it now.
Did political correctness inhibit authorities from taking action in the grooming gang scandal in particular?
I mean, I couldn't possibly answer that because I wasn't on the inside of any investigation. I think what inhibits anyone taking action is not understanding this subject as much as we should. Does
that apply to the church as well?
I think it does, and I think people are so scared by it that understandably we want to think it's happening to other people, so we don't want to engage with it. And one of the main recommendations of Alexis J's report was to have a single core set of data and to have a public education campaign. They haven't been done.
Well, briefly, we've got a new leader of the Church of England today, the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, who has himself been accused of safeguarding failings. Is he fit to lead the church, in your view?
I mean, he promoted a known abuser and this abuser had paid his victim. Stephen Cottrell promoted him to area dean, thereby putting him in a bigger position of trust. I think it's down to the public to see whether they really believe that this is a man who should be in charge of 4,700 Church of England primary schools.